Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. In fact, welcome to December, as today is December 1st. As usual, we have that information at the bottom of the screen. That's your best way to get a forecast outside of our show. Weather.gov/Alaska is where you can find lots of weather and climate information on the internet if you have internet access. And nws.ar.tv, weather at noaa.gov is how you can get a hold of us for any questions or comments. We'll get right into our weather because once again, there's a lot to talk about. We have winter weather advisories in effect for the western interior as well as the southeastern Brooks Range. Those are going to be for accumulating snow through Wednesday night. And that snow is going to make travel a little bit more difficult than usual. We're expecting the heaviest snow to be west of Dalton Highway in the Brooks Range. We also have wind advisories in effect for the Alaska Range as well as the Delta Junction area. Those are going to be for winds up to about 60 miles per hour. So high-profile vehicles may have difficult time traveling, and we're looking at the potential for tree limbs and some power lines to come down, so there could be some isolated power outages. Those wind advisories are going to be in effect through Wednesday afternoon. A little further south in the Susitna Valley, we have a winter weather advisory in effect. This has been changed from a winter storm warning. So we're not expecting as heavy of snow, but still continuing snowfall accumulation in the northern and western Susitna Valley areas. That's generally going to be north and west of Talkeetna. Expect continuing accumulation of snow until Wednesday afternoon. We have a flood advisory that remains in effect for the Seward Highway area between Moose Pass and Seward. We are expecting some heavy rain after the snow that we saw yesterday. So poor drainage areas could see some minor flooding in that area. For the Panhandle, we still have a lot going on as we've got an atmospheric river event continuing. We have a flood watch in effect for most of the Panhandle. That's going to be in effect through Wednesday night. And in addition to what we've already seen, we're expecting another 2 to 5 inches of rain across the Panhandle. So a lot of rain and the potential for flooding of small streams and creeks, as well as the potential for debris flows. Speaking of flooding, we do have a flood advisory in effect for the central Panhandle, including Juneau and Sitka. That is also for some minor flooding of poor drainage areas, as well as small creeks and streams, and the potential for some debris flows. Now, it's also been windy in the Panhandle today, and although that high wind warning has expired for the Juneau area, those winds are only going to come down to just below that high wind warning criteria. So we're still expecting very breezy to windy conditions for the Juneau area and the central Panhandle in general. We do still have a high wind warning in effect for the southern inner channels, including Ketchikan. That's going to be for winds up to 65 miles per hour, gusts that is. And that's certainly going to be capable of bringing down some trees and power lines and causing widespread power outages. That high wind warning is going to be in effect through 9 p.m. this evening, so not quite in the clear yet, but winds should be dying down a little bit later tonight. As we look at our satellite imagery, we can see what's left of our low pressure system with that comma shape again stretching from south central around and back into the Gulf. We can also see that plume of moisture in those clouds headed right into the Panhandle. That is our atmospheric river bringing lots and lots of heavy rain from Yakutat all the way south through the Panhandle. And finally, a little bit further north into the interior, we can see the clouds that are bringing that snow associated with those winter weather advisories across the western interior and southeastern Brooks Range. So for our surface chart for today, we have our low pressure system at 972 millibars. So it's been weakening since yesterday, but still on the strong side for a low pressure system. And that's bringing that heavy rain into the Gulf Coast from about Prince William Sound all the way down through the Panhandle. We've also got a stationary front stretching north and east from that low pressure system with some breezy conditions along that front. So we've got some blowing snow in the Yukon Flats area, even though there's no new snow. The snow that's there is going to be blown around due to those winds. We've also got a trough again over the northwestern portion of the state. That is going to cause some blowing snow for the Seward Peninsula, as well as freezing spray continuing to be a concern across the Chukchi Sea as well as the northern Bering Sea. Heading into tonight, our low pressure system in the northern Gulf continues to weaken, but also continues to bring heavy rain to the Gulf Coast and the Panhandle, as well as the potential for some heavy snow briefly in the Prince William Sound area. We'll continue to have freezing spray in the Chukchi Sea as well as the northern Bering Sea as those winds continue to be breezy across the west coast. For Wednesday, that low is moving a little bit further inland, so we'll have a little bit more showery on and off precipitation activity behind that low. So that's why we have a lot of our winter weather products advisories dropping off during the day on Wednesday as that snow turns to kind of showery instead of constant accumulation. We'll still have during the day on Wednesday heavy rain in the Panhandle, so that flood watch will remain in effect through Wednesday night. And for Thursday, things finally start to calm down a little bit for the southern half of the state. We'll still have some snow around, but it'll be on the lighter side, and rain becoming lighter in the Panhandle as well. We've got a trough over the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas, so some breezy conditions across the Chukchi Sea with freezing spray continuing for the Chukchi Sea on Thursday. For temperatures Wednesday morning, we are looking at negative single digits for the North Slope in general. A little bit warmer across the interior with positives, even some teens there with 15 degrees at Fairbanks. We've got 30s right around freezing for South Central and the Kenai Peninsula, and then warming as we head into the peak of that atmospheric river activity down into the Panhandle with temperatures in the 40s. For Wednesday afternoon, warm again for the Panhandle, temperatures upper 40s to around 50, and warm again for the area south of the Alaska Range too, with temperatures in the 40s. Even a little bit warmer for the interior with temperatures in the teens and 20s. For Thursday morning, we are looking at colder again, with the western half of the state noticeably colder than what we're expecting for Wednesday morning. So for Thursday morning, we are looking at some negatives all the way down into the interior Bristol Bay area with 0 degrees there at Dillingham. We'll have a little bit warmer still, but colder than what we've been seeing for South Central in the teens and 20s, and still on the warmer side, but again cooler than what we've been seeing for the Panhandle with lows in the upper 30s to around 40. And then we'll also see cooler temperatures during the day on Thursday afternoon, single digits for most of the interior with 20s for South Central and 40s again for the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to a look at your aviation forecast, starting out with flying weather for Wednesday morning. We're expecting quite a lot of IFR conditions in the Gulf, as well as the Gulf Coast and the Panhandle, associated with that low pressure system and all of that precipitation coming up into the area. Those IFR conditions are going to spread up the western part of the state through the Brooks Range and even to the North Slope. For Wednesday afternoon, some improvement for the western Gulf from the Alaska Peninsula up through the Kenai Peninsula and parts of South Central. Improvement there at least to MVFR. IFR continuing for the northeastern Gulf and the Panhandle though. Also IFR developing along the northwestern portion of the state, the Chukchi Coast, as well as the western portion of Seward Peninsula. For Thursday morning, we finally see some improvement to MVFR, at least for the northeastern Gulf and the Panhandle. We do have IFR conditions developing across the eastern Brooks Range, though, as well as the eastern North Slope, and IFR conditions continuing for parts of the Chukchi Sea and Northwest. For Thursday afternoon, those IFR conditions for the Panhandle are back with MVFR conditions spreading westward across the Gulf Coast to Prince William Sound. We're also seeing IFR conditions developing in the Aleutians with our next system for Thursday afternoon. Pass conditions on Wednesday, AKwx Pass IFR as well as Adigan Pass IFR on Wednesday. Lake Clark and Merrill passes both IFR on Wednesday as well, and Rainy Pass IFR on Wednesday. Windy Pass starting out Wednesday morning MVFR, but deteriorating Wednesday afternoon to IFR. Isabel Pass MVFR during the day on Wednesday, and Mentasta Pass MVFR on Wednesday. Tanita Pass IFR and Portage Pass starting the day at IFR, but seeing some improvement Wednesday afternoon to MVFR. And Chilkoot and White Passes both expected to be IFR conditions all day on Wednesday. For freezing levels, we can see that warmer air coming up from the southeast into the Panhandle. So we have 2,000 foot freezing level, actually stretching all the way up the Canadian border, essentially to the North Slope. So 2,000 feet right along the Canadian border, stretching down into the northern Panhandle through about Yakutat, and then 4,000 feet through the northern inner channels, increasing as we head south down the Panhandle to 6,000 feet, 8,000 feet, and then the very southern tip of the Panhandle greater than 8,000 feet freezing level. For icing on Wednesday, we do have an area of considerable moderate icing that's going to stretch all the way from the Kenai Peninsula and South Central across the Gulf Coast and into the Panhandle. For the South Central area around Prince William Sound, that's going to be above 5,000 feet. And for the Panhandle, it's going to be above 8,000 feet. We also have a lot of isolated moderate icing over the mainland of above about 1,000 feet, and also isolated moderate over the Alaska Peninsula and much of the Aleutians above 3,000 feet. Your jet stream winds on Wednesday, one clear jet, just like we saw yesterday, 125 to 145 knots, almost due south, coming up in the middle of the Gulf and into the eastern side of Prince William Sound, stretching over to the Canadian border near where the Yukon River crosses the border. As we look at 9,000 feet, we have strong winds once again coming into the Panhandle, 65 to 85 knots of wind out of the south, a little bit of southwest into the Panhandle. Also increased winds over much of the Gulf, 45 to 50 knots over south central and stretching all the way up into the eastern Brooks Range. We also have a little bit of a secondary jet across the west coast, 25 to about 40 knots from the Bering Strait down to the southern Alaska Peninsula. And at 3,000 feet, again, we're seeing our strong winds over the Panhandle area, anywhere from 50 to about 80 knots out of the south coming into the Panhandle there. That's what's going to be carrying all of that moisture into that area. We're also seeing about 35 knots over portions of the rest of the Gulf out of the southwest, and a little bit of a stronger jet over the west coast out of the north. So 35 to 40 knots there. Finally, for turbulence on Wednesday, we are looking at another area of isolated severe turbulence over the Panhandle where we have all those strong winds. So that isolated severe turbulence is generally going to be below about 6,000 feet. We also have considerable moderate turbulence over south central below about 6,000 feet. North of there, north of the Alaska Range into the Yukon Flats below about 4,000 feet, and some areas for the Alaska Peninsula below 4,000 feet.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track three aerosols, dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. We're on to a look at the marine forecast. Starting with the sea ice edge, you can see that the Russian side of the Chukchi Sea is filling in nicely with ice, but the water in the center of the Chukchi Sea is still a little bit too warm for ice to cover the entire Chukchi Sea. So we're waiting for that water to cool off to some extent a little bit more before the rest of that ice fills in the Chukchi Sea. For southeast on Wednesday, for winds and seas, we are looking at very strong winds out of the southeast for much of the Gulf, 35 to 45 knots with really large seas, 27 to 30 feet, it looks like on Wednesday for the Gulf. For the inside waterways, breezy but not nearly as windy for Wednesday, 20 to 30 knots out of the south, with seas 4 to 5 feet in the north and central inside waterways, but 12 feet in those southern inside waterways. For Thursday, we get a little bit of a reprieve from the winds and seas, although both of them remain elevated to some extent. For the Gulf, we'll see winds 15 to 35 knots, and for the inside waterways, 15 to 30 knots. Seas still in the 15 to 18 foot range for the Gulf, 3 to 4 feet still for the northern inside waterways, and still around 10 feet for the southern inside waterways. For south central on Wednesday, 15 to 25 knot winds out of the south and southeast, although we do have some westerly flow as we head into the western Gulf near the Barrens, so 20 to 30 knots there. We are looking at seas anywhere from 13 to 17 feet, so definitely elevated on Wednesday in the Gulf. For Thursday, winds coming down a little bit, 15 to about 30 knots, a little bit more westerly flow across the area. Westerly, northwesterly and southwesterly is what we'll be seeing. Seas coming down just a little bit to 12 to 16 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, we're looking at westerly and northwesterly flow, 20 to 25 knots across the board. Seas anywhere from about 9 to 13 feet. And for Thursday, we have the winds coming down in some areas, especially Bristol Bay. We've got northeast flow, 10 knots for Bristol Bay on Thursday. Still 15 to 25 knots elsewhere, though. And we're looking at seas coming down significantly on the Bering Sea side, just 2 to 4 feet, but still 8 to 10 feet on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. For the Aleutian chain, winds 10 to 25 knots, generally easterly flow is what we're looking at, 6 to 7 feet of seas on Wednesday. So winds and seas both a little bit lower than they have been in the past couple of days. For Thursday, those winds and seas are coming right back up a little bit though. So 20 to even as high as 40 knots of wind still out of the east and northeast in general. Although we do have some northwesterly flow for the western Aleutians, and seas anywhere from 8 to about 16 feet for Thursday. For the west coast on Wednesday, we're looking at northwesterly flow, 20 to 30 knots, so still a little bit breezy, and we'll still be looking at some freezing spray in the northern Bering on Wednesday. Seas anywhere from about 6 to 8 feet. And Thursday, those winds finally come down a little bit, so that freezing spray concern dissipates to some extent with 15 knot winds across the west coast and seas in the 3 to 4 foot range. For the Arctic coast, we've got that counterclockwise circulation of flow. So we've got easterly flow along the north slope and then northerly flow on the west coast in the Chukchi Sea. So about 15 knots of wind for the north slope, 25 to 30 knots out of the north for the Chukchi Sea and into the Bering Strait. And we've got 3 to 8 foot seas. We're also looking at the concern for freezing spray. That's going to last a little bit longer for the Chukchi Sea than the Bering Sea as these winds continue to stay up on Thursday, 20 to 25 knots out of the west. And we're looking at, again, that continuing freezing spray threat into Thursday for the Chukchi Sea. Recapping what we have going on for the next couple of days, we've got our low pressure system, weaker but still packing a punch. We've got wind advisories, we've got winter weather advisories, and we've got flood watches going into the Panhandle. As we head into the day on Wednesday, that heavy rain is going to continue for the Panhandle, but we'll start to see a little bit of a break for south central and parts of the interior with that snow at least lightening up. And then Thursday is where things really start to calm down for most of the state with that rain lightening up in the Panhandle, although we will again continue to see freezing spray in the Chukchi Sea. Thanks so much for watching Alaska TV Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.